Good morning. Welcome to the worship with the community of Westside Unitarian Universalist Church, where compassion leads us to work for justice and equality. My name is Caroline Nixon, and I am your worship leader this morning. I'm glad that you are joining us for the service today. It is my hope that this gathering will renew your sense of community and connection and nourish your heart, mind, and spirit. Thank you to my AV team volunteer co-hosts this morning, Janelle Weaver and Nikki Kennedy, and special thanks to Yuki Kumamoto for selecting and playing beautiful music throughout the service. And also want to thank our fabulous DLRE, Nikki Kennedy, for her selection and execution of our Time for All Ages this morning. At Westside, we are raising the next generation of Unitarian Universalists, and we want them to know that they are an important part of our community. Several years ago, we chose to be a radically inclusive congregation and to adopt a multi-generational worship. That's where our services include all family members. So welcome to all children and youth of all ages. Westside is a community of many beliefs, genders, and sexualities, a community of diverse cultural, racial, class, all kinds of backgrounds, a community of varied abilities and gifts. Some here find inspiration in the great books, others in the great outdoors, and others still in great conversations. Whoever you may be, we welcome you to bring your whole self into this community. If you are so moved, you can try out the chat feature on Zoom by typing in some words of welcome to both members and visitors who are joining us this morning. On behalf of this church community, I say welcome. Now, take a breath, and from wherever you are, settle into this sacred space that we create together. Now let us worship together as we listen to this morning's prelude performed by Yuki Kumamoto.
Morning. Our opening words today are from the Reverend Dr. Hope Johnson, titled, "We Are One." We are one, a diverse group of proudly kindred spirits, here not by coincidence, but because we choose to journey together. We are active and proactive. We care deeply. We live our love as best we can. We are one, working, eating, laughing, playing, singing, storytelling, sharing, and rejoicing, getting to know each other, taking risks, opening up, questioning, seeking, searching, trying to understand, struggling, making mistakes, paying attention, asking questions, listening, living our answers, learning to love our neighbors, learning to love ourselves, apologizing and forgiving with humility, and being forgiven through grace, creating the beloved community together.
Our opening hymn this morning is number 1000, Morning Has Come, written by Jason Shelton. Please join me by lighting your chalice at home, if you have one. The flaming chalice is our Unitarian Universalist symbol of both the heritage of our past and the light of hope within this congregation today. Our chalice lighting words are written by Robin Slaw and from this month's Soulful Home collection on commitment. As we light this chalice, we make a commitment to stay curious, to ask questions and to make observations, to learn about ourselves and how we interact with the world. We make a commitment to wonder each day, to practice gratitude each day, to learn and be inspired. We make a commitment to Unitarian Universalism, the values that we hold together, the promises we make to each other. We make a commitment to change for the future, to put love into action, to work for equity and justice, to promise to build a better world. Our chalice lighting song is Be the Light by Leah Morris.
There is always a light When we are ready to see it, there is always a light. When we are ready to be it, to see the light, to be the light, to raise our eyes in the dark of night, to climb this hill, together we will. There is always a light in the dark. We are ready to see it. There is always a light in the dark. We are ready to be it. To see the light, to be the light, to raise our eyes in the dark of night and be a gift. Together we will. There is always a light. There is always a light. We are ready to see it. There is always a light. There is always a light. We are ready to be it. To see the light, to be the light, to raise our eyes in the dark of night and be a gift. Together we will. There is always light. There is always light. There is always light. There is always light. To see the light, to be the light, to shine our eyes in the dark of night and be a climb this hill. Together we will. There is always light. There is always light. There is always light. There is always light. Be the light.
Please join me in reciting our affirmation. Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest of truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge in freedom, to serve others in community, to the end that all souls shall grow into harmony with creation. Thus do we covenant with one another. Our time for all ages today was recommended by our Soul Matters program. We hope you enjoy this video.
How many of us have heard the starfish story about a little boy throwing starfish into the ocean? Despite being disparaged by an older man, the story ends with the boy giving the famous line, "It mattered to that one." While it's a great story that's been popular for decades, the original story has so much more depth. It was written in 1978 by Loren Eiseley, a science writer, based on experiences from his own life. Eiseley goes on a trip to a coastal tourist town alone. He's in a pessimistic and difficult place in his life. The trip is a soul-searching one for him. As he contemplates his life and his many challenges, he feels especially lonely. One evening, as Eiseley walks thoughtfully along the beach, he notices that there is sea life scattered along the beach due to the low tide. There are professional shellers and tourists who are anxiously picking them up to cook or sell. The stranded creatures don't stand a chance. This frantic grasping for personal gain adds to Eiseley's feelings of pessimism toward humanity. The next morning at dawn, Eiseley goes to the beach for another walk. The same gatherers are still on the beach, but this time he notices a lone figure on the horizon on a rocky part near a cove. As Eiseley gets closer, he sees the man picking up starfish from the small tide pools and throwing them back into the sea. He approaches the man and strikes up a conversation. The star-throwing man, with kindness in his eyes, tells him, "The stars throw well. One can help them." Eiseley is astounded at his optimism. As he walks away, he's filled with cynicism about the man's futile goal. Into the evening, Eiseley contemplates more about life, has a change of heart, and then decides to revisit the star thrower the next day. On the beach the next morning, standing beside the star thrower, Eiseley quietly picks up and throws a starfish into the ocean. Eiseley then says, I understand. Call me another thrower. And tells himself that he won't let the star thrower be alone in his mission to save a life, one at a time. It concludes with Isley and the star thrower standing together looking out at the sea. Isley writes, "But we, pale and alone and small in that immensity, hurled back the living stars. Somewhere far off, I felt as though another world was flung more joyfully. I could have thrown in a frenzy of joy, but I set my shoulders and cast, as the thrower, slowly, deliberately as well. The task was not to assumed lightly, for it was men as well as starfish that we sought to save." Live Rad is about average people attempting to help others while also encouraging others to join in. Let's never stop looking for starfish to save, and better yet, invite others to join us in our ideas and efforts. We hope that Live Rad becomes a community of starfish throwers.
I love that more complete version of the story. Our joys and concerns will be shared by Christina Sellers, a representative of the pastoral care team.
Good morning, everyone. Okay. As we share our joys with others, those joys are multiplied. When our hearts know our joy shines all the brighter. As we share our concerns, our community can offer its care. When other hearts know our sorrow, our burden becomes lighter. This is the time in our service when we offer witness and support for one another's journeys. Please post in the chat if you have a joy or concern you would like to share with everyone today and those who will watch the recording later. Joys and concerns can be submitted at any time via email to the pastoral care team or through the web form located on the Care and Support page of the church's website. We have a joy this morning from Cindy Fountain. I was asked to help transport an asylum-seeking dad from Houston to Greenville on Thursday. Just when we got 3 drivers and drop-off points confirmed, we got word that the flight to Houston was delayed and would be later that night. So the plan became an ACLU attorney meeting the plane and getting the man on a bus to Greenville. This joy is a precious one because this was the reuniting of a father and son who had been separated at the border by Trump's zero tolerance policy in 2018. And Cindy did have a follow-up to that said that the man and the father and son were reunited. And the name of the group organizing this was El Otro Lado, who was a UU minister is involved in it. So that is a joy for this morning. Let the chat here. Okay, we have a joy from Janelle Weaver. So many are now getting their first and second shots. May we all be vaccinated soon and back together. From Pete Metter, we have a joy that Beverly returns home on Wednesday night. That's good to hear. From, yeah, Caroline Nixon, the same joy. Okay. All right, it looks like that's about all. Thank you all so much for sharing those with us. It's good to share with one another as sharing draws our community closer. Please know that our pastoral care associates are available to support you with deep listening and when needed through our InReach Fund for short-term financial support of members in need. We're here for you.
Thank you, Christina. Our centering song is There Is a Love from two members of the Melrose Unitarian Universalist Church.
I invite you to join me in a time of centering. Each week here at Westside, we open our hearts to those in our community who know both joys and challenges, and also to the joys and suffering of the wider world. I will begin with a reading before we move into a time for silent reflection. I will ring a bell to signal to start at this time for your own meditation, prayer, or reflection, and I will ring the bell again at the end. I invite you and your families to check in with your body, sitting tall but comfortable, and perhaps close your eyes as I share this meditation from Chaplain Luna Mancuso. I take care of myself first because I am deserving of exquisite care. I take care of myself to maintain the capacity to help others. I move and stretch my body every day. I spend time in nature, attuning my senses to the earth's wisdom. I ration my daily exposure to the news. I identify and access credible sources of information. I protect myself from becoming overwhelmed by information about the pandemic. I pace myself. I sit with the reality of uncertainty and impermanence and allow it to temper my desire for control. I listen without judgment to others' reactions, which may be different from mine. I forgive myself and others when stress brings out our shadow selves. I feel fear fully when I am afraid. I experience sadness fully when I am sad. I allow anger fully when I am angry. I relish joy fully when I am joyful. I seek out healthy pleasures and indulge in them without guilt. I remind myself that feelings are transient states that move through me. They do not last, and they do not define me, nor do my thoughts. I balance my drive for self-improvement with compassionate acceptance of myself as I am right now. I initiate contact with loved ones to let them know I hold them in my heart. I seek out with increased sensitivity those who are the most vulnerable. If possible, I share my resources with those who need help to survive. When possible, I move away from people, situations, and experiences that do not serve my highest good. I strengthen my connection to my sources of spiritual strength so that I continue to be replenished. I acknowledge the nearness of death as a key motivator for living a full life. I pray for the suffering of all beings to cease. I grieve my losses and celebrate my successes. I remain open to new ways of being, surprising sources of joy, and unanticipated discoveries every day. May it be so, blessed be, and amen.
Thank you, Diane. West Side Service Project for this month is Meals on Wheels of Tarrant County. Meals on Wheels' mission is to promote the dignity and independence of older adults, persons with disabilities, and other homebound persons by delivering nutritious meals and providing or coordinating needed services. Meals on Wheels began in 1973 as a collaboration between 11 faith-based organizations in downtown Fort Worth to bring food to the elderly in the Central City area. Today, it serves all of Tarrant County, providing approximately 1 million meals each year. Last Sunday, we heard from John Fisher about how Meals on Wheels has been a lifesaver. This Sunday, let's honor the work of Meals on Wheels volunteer Spencer Maxwell, who delivered meals during Snowbid, as well as provided rides to our congregation members in his all-wheel drive vehicle by contributing to this worthy organization. You can give online, either through the church's giving page, see the link in the chat, or by using the Give Plus app. Just select the Service Project Fund. You can also mail a check to the church. Now enjoy this musical offering from our pianist, Yuki.
Thank you again for your generosity. Our reflection this morning is entitled "A Person Will Worship Something" by the Reverend Gretchen Haley, and it will be delivered to us this morning by our member, Tanner Trask.
Good morning. So just a super quick thank you to the Reverend Gretchen Haley for making this sermon available to us. And one of the things that we wanted to make sure we did was presented unedited. So there's going to be a couple of references to services of the past few weeks. That's from Reverend Haley's church, not necessarily ours. So I just want to make sure there wasn't any confusion about that. All right, so a person will worship something. When my partner first started working for Lutherans, she came home one day and asked me if I'd ever heard the phrase God-sized hole. She said that one of her coworkers used it a lot to describe some people. Some folks, she says, just have a God-sized hole. Carrie and I didn't really understand it, but we were both kind of intrigued. With some more investigation, we learned the phrase was a way to describe people who have a longing in their heart that they try to fill up with everything, but nothing satisfies. It's too big. It's the size of infinity. Initially, we thought of a God-sized hole as kind of patronizing, like if only the person would get religious, become Lutheran, for example, their life would be complete. But over time, we made our own meaning for the idea, and actually it started to make a lot of sense because we knew people where it applied. Friends and family and clients and congregants who seemed like they were born with a deeper sense of yearning than others, an incompleteness, a sense of being lost and unsure of their place, a simultaneous pronounced desire to understand life's meaning or purpose, alongside an equally pronounced fear that it may have none at all. And this same type of person seems to always be on a search to fill up that hole they feel, that constant craving, but nothing they do, nothing they ingest, inhale, avoid, perform, nothing they do is enough. They have a God-sized, or since then I've heard some call it a God-shaped, hole. Maybe you know the sort of person I mean. Maybe it's someone you know, and maybe it's you. A few weeks into my chaplaincy at a community hospital in the Denver metro area a few years back, this phrase and idea really started to sink in. I really started to understand it. There are all kinds of stories you encounter as a chaplain. If you can imagine, you are suddenly plopped down into the middle of someone's most vulnerable moment, again and again, plopped down into the middle of family dynamics and lifestyles and cultures, and in the middle of deeply held beliefs being put to the test, and hospital politics, how much of life is really a mystery, how at the mercy of fate, and chance that and chance and that whole pretense of accident and providence I spoke about a couple of weeks ago. Out of the many I sat with that summer, one stood out then and sticks with me still, these many years later. He hadn't requested a chaplain, but we would often just knock and check in, especially in those rooms like his, where we hadn't observed any visitors. So I knocked, and I found him there looking out the window. He was my age, maybe younger, hard to tell. Though I didn't know when I walked in what had brought him to the hospital, as soon as I sat down, I started to guess. The look in his eyes was painfully familiar, a look of desperation, despair, profound longing, aching sadness. The day before, I had sat with a woman who had attempted to take her own life. The looks were not so different. It didn't take long to realize this young man, he had a God-sized hole. He was there after many days of drinking had left him seizing on a sidewalk, and someone called 911. He had detoxed in the ER and everything was quiet on the surface. He told me about the loss of his young nephew, who had died not too long before, and he wondered if it would be better to go join him in heaven. The woman I had visited the day before, the one who had taken a bottle of pills, she had guards at her door. It was a given that the chaplain would be called in to meet with her several times, and she was not allowed to be discharged until there was a clear plan for continued psychological services. But for this man, who had come in drunk and seizing, probably not even for the first time, he was discharged shortly after my visit, less than 24 hours after he'd first arrived. If I hadn't stopped by randomly, no chaplain would have been called. No more than a week passed, and I saw his name appear again on our roster, this time in the ICU, intensive care unit, reserved for the most fragile cases. He had accidentally set his apartment on fire after another binge. Smoke inhalation brought him into the ICU. In rounds, the physicians spoke about his lungs. They mentioned his alcohol levels, but just to describe the medicine to help with his detox. Still, no guards, no psychological services, no automatic chaplain. I went in to see him, but he was asleep. I came back the next day to check in, and he had been discharged. When I first shared with our worship learning community that I wanted to offer a sermon on idolatry, they responded with both intrigue and confusion. Idolatry is one of those concepts that hasn't been translated well in liberal religious communities. Like, we don't worship golden calves, right? So it doesn't apply. And besides, as theological pluralists, maybe worshiping a calf should be considered a valid religious pursuit. In truth, guarding against idolatry is a very Unitarian Universalist practice. As Minister Marlon Lavanhar, the lead minister in the largest UU church in Tulsa, Oklahoma, says in his sermon, Why Atheists Go to Church, when people ask me how we have atheists in our church, I tell them that in our church we are much more concerned about idolatry than we are about atheism. That usually gets me an interesting look and people's ears perk up. I explain that idolatry, of course, is when someone worships something that is less than God or less than the ultimate good. Whenever someone devotes their life and best efforts to something smaller than what is of ultimate value, they are committing idolatry. You know people for whom money, power, prestige, fame, and fortune have become the driving force and the highest good in their lives, even if they might claim otherwise. And here I'd offer the timely example of those who orient their lives around a blind nationalism. You might have seen some of them worshiping this weekend. Marlon continues, at this church, we offer better alternatives for what makes life valuable and meaningful. As our reading from Emerson asserts, We humans have this innate desire to orient our lives around something we can consider ultimately worthy, something so important that we can devote our attention and resources to it. And yet we aren't always all that good at figuring out what is worthy of such devotion. And for some of us, it almost seems like we will devote our lives to the exact opposite of what would be worthy. Things that it seems obvious to most everyone else won't fill us up, but rather will take us and everyone we love down. After my patient's second discharge, I was feeling pretty confused and heartbroken. How was I supposed to think about this man's life, this little snippet I had seen of his life, and the ways we had just sent him back out there to what? How was I to think about it as a chaplain in this hospital, as a Unitarian Universalist, as a minister, as a fellow human? My supervisor encouraged me to stay in the struggle, the pain, to know that these feelings of being lost and confused were not so far away from the place this man lived for much of his life. And as his spiritual companion, my confusion was simply a matter of effective empathy. I was doing my job, which I knew was true, and also it wasn't enough. Addiction had touched my life too often. I knew too well the devastation it brings to all those who come near, to all who come near those in its grips, to believe that my only job was to feel confused and heartbroken. So finally, my supervisor gave in and suggested we spend a week studying addiction, using the book Addiction and Grace by psychiatrist and spiritual counselor Gerald Mays as our primary text. Mays's subject is, as the title implies, theoretically about addiction. He worked for many years as an addiction counselor, and his writing comes out of those experiences. But for me, his ideas far transcended the field of addiction and recovery. His basic idea is, well, it goes back to that God-sized hole. But Mays doesn't think that just some people have a God-sized hole. He says we all do. Whether you conceive of it theistically or atheistically, we all have an inborn desire for the experience of unconditional, transcendent love. We are made by this kind of love, for this love, to further the ways of this unconditional, everlasting love. We want to experience and to further its reach more than anything else. And yet, for some reason, we will fill our lives up with things that aren't this love. Compulsively, hungrily, we prize an overbooked schedule, or knowing the most about the most things. We cherish a perfect performance at work, or those elusive six-pack abs. We center our lives around a healthy and balanced bank account, or being constantly connected in our social network of choice. We devote all of our thinking to our children becoming high achievers, or we arrange our whole lives based on what will save the most time. Whatever it is, we put these things first, and maybe not even consciously, and we order our lives around them. And this stuff is ultimately, of course, unfulfilling, because they are not the ultimate good, they are idols, which means we seek them even more, so we can fill up that need, that yearning inside us. And because we keep pursuing these other things, we sabotage our capacity to experience or further our true heart's desire for the real big love. As the early Christian writer Augustine observed, God is always trying to give good things to us, but our hands are too full to receive them. Our spiritual work, Mays proposes, is to empty our hands. Empty our hands so that we are free to fully experience, pursue, and further the ways of love. And here he makes an important distinction. He says, none of these other things are bad in and of themselves. Only when we orient our lives around them, when we worship them, treat them as ultimately worthy, that they become a problem. Only then do they become idols? What are you carrying in your life, on your heart, that is getting in the way of life's gifts? What are you orienting your life around that will not lead you to love, but keep you from it? What are you worshiping? This is one of the most important questions our interim minister is charged with asking us as a religious community. Faith communities, even liberal ones, over time start to think of certain practices or ways of working together as if they were carved on stone tablets by divine love itself. But most aren't. And if we treat them like they are, then they become the exact thing that will keep us from truly serving our greater mission, or from experiencing or furthering the reach of that greater, healing, transformative love. Letting go of these idols in our personal lives or as a community, well, to say it's hard work is a profound understatement, as well as a mischaracterization of our clinging to these things in the first place. Because for Mays, all of these idolatries are in fact various types of addictions, whether alcohol or technology, heroin or money, perfectionism or dieting. Once these pursuits take hold of your devotion, you cannot use your will alone to undo their grip. However you might conceive of it, overcoming these compulsions, fully emptying your hands, resisting the pull to just fill them back up again with something new, requires grace. I didn't talk about grace in my sermon on providence a couple weeks ago, but I could have. Grace is best understood as those gifts you did not earn or deserve, and yet they are yours nonetheless. Unearned and undeserved, not because you are undeserving, but because there is nothing you or anyone could do to earn or deserve them. I call my children acts of grace. I call my life a gift of grace. This beautiful day in all its possibility, filled with grace. May's ideas about addiction and his framing it as idolatry, and then the way he applies it to all of us and the necessary role of grace. These ideas didn't make my patient's story or any of my experiences with addiction any less heartbreaking. But rather than thinking of my patient as broken in ways I could never understand, I started to see how we shared a common struggle. And I started to imagine that as partners in this great universe, bumping into one another, each in our own ways attempting to find and pursue the light, that we were in this together, and showing up with unconditional love at his bedside, that was all there was to do. For those few moments, I offered him grace, and it was in his hands if he would cling to his addiction more tightly or begin to release. This life is filled with so many things calling for our attention, so many things claiming themselves as ultimately worthy of our devotion, our private and public worship and tribute. In our walk together, may we be embodied gifts of grace for one another, gifts of grace for all the world, and whisper to one another of the greater love at the heart of life itself, that love we long for, waiting for our free hands and free hearts, so that it can give us all the gifts. So may we worship, so may we become.
I love that message. Our closing hymn this morning is number 108, My Life Flows On in Endless Song, performed by the chancel choir of the First Unitarian Church of Oakland in 2010. Please sing along.
My life flows on in endless song above earth's lamentation. I hear the rhythm
Our closing words are from the Reverend Dr. Michael Schuler. If you are proud of this church, become its advocate. If you are concerned for its future, share its message. If its values resonate deep within you, give it a measure of your devotion. This church cannot survive without your faith, your confidence, your enthusiasm. Its destiny, the larger hope, rests in your hands.
Awesome. Our commitment. Thank you, Tanner. Everyone, please join me in the congregational closing as we extinguish our chalices. Let us go in peace, believe in peace, and create peace in our lives and in the world. May it be so, blessed be, and amen.